28. When Vronsky and Anna reached Petersburg, they put up at one of the best hotels. Vronsky separately on the first floor, and Anna with the baby, the nurse and a maid, upstairs in a large suite consisting of 4 rooms. On the day they arrived, Vronsky went to see his brother. There he met his mother, who had come from Moscow on business. His mother and his sister-in-law received him just as usual, asked him about his trip abroad, and spoke of mutual acquaintances, but did not say a single word about his union with Anna. His brother, however, having come to see him next morning, asked about her, and Alexis Vronsky told him frankly that he regarded his union with her as a marriage, that he hoped to arrange a divorce for her, and would then marry her, and that meanwhile he considered her his wife, just like any other wife, and he asked his brother to say so to their mother and to his own wife. "If the world does not approve of it, I don't care," said Vronsky, "but if my relatives wish to treat me as a relation, they must adopt a similar attitude toward my wife." The elder brother, who had always respected his younger brother's opinions, was not sure whether he was right or wrong, until the world had decided the point. But for his own part, he had nothing against it, and went up with Alexis to see Anna. In his brother's presence, Vronsky spoke to Anna merely as to a close acquaintance, as he always did in the presence of a third party. But it was assumed that his brother knew of their relations, and they spoke of Anna's going to Vronsky's estate. Despite all his experience of the world, Vronsky, in the new position in which he found himself, was making a terrible mistake. He might have been expected to understand that society was closed to him and Anna, but some sort of vague notion got into his head that though it used to be so in olden times, yet now, when there was so much progress, without noticing it, he had become an advocate of every kind of progress. Public opinion had changed, and it was possible that they would be received in society. Of course they would not receive her at court, but intimate friends can and should see things the right way, he thought. It is possible to sit for some hours with one's legs doubled up, without changing one's position, if one knows there is nothing to prevent one's doing so. But if a man knows that he must sit with his legs doubled up, he will get cramp, and his legs will begin to jerk and strain in the direction in which he would like to stretch them. This was what Vronsky experienced with regard to society. Though in the depths of his soul he knew that society was close to them, he tried whether it would not change, and whether it would not receive them. But he very soon noticed that though the great world was open to him personally, it was closed to Anna. As in the game of cat and mouse, the arms that were raised to allow him to get inside the circle were at once lowered to prevent Anna from entering. One of the first Petersburg society ladies he met was his cousin Betsy. "At last!" she exclaimed joyfully when they met. "And Anna? I'm so glad. Where are you staying? I can imagine how dreadful our Petersburg must appear to you after your delightful journey. I can picture to myself your honeymoon in Rome. And the divorce? Is it all arranged?" He noticed that Betsy's delight cooled down when she learned that Anna had not yet been divorced. "They will throw stones at me, I know," she said, "but I shall come and see Anna. Yes, I will certainly come. You're not staying here long?" And really she came to see Anna that same day. But her manner was very different from what it had formerly been. She was evidently proud of her boldness, and wished Anna to appreciate the fidelity of her friendship. She did not stay more than 10 minutes, chattering society gossip, and as she was leaving, said, "You have not told me when you will be divorced. Of course I have kicked over the traces, but others, straight-laced people, will give you the cold shoulder until you get married. And it is so simple nowadays. It is a thing that is done. So you're leaving on Friday? I'm sorry we shan't see one another again." From Betsy's tone, Vronsky might have realized what he had to expect from society. But he made another attempt with his relations. Of his mother, he had no hopes. He knew that his mother, who had been so delighted with Anna when she first made her acquaintance, was now merciless toward her for having caused the ruin of her son's career. But he placed great hopes on Varya, his brother's wife. She, he thought, would cast no stones, but would simply and resolutely go and see Anna and receive her at her own house. The day after his arrival, Vronsky called on her, and having found her alone, expressed his wish. "You know how fond I am of you, Alexis," she replied, when she had heard him out, "and how ready I am to do anything for you. But I've kept silent because I knew I could be of no use to you and Anna Arkadyevna." She pronounced the formal Anna Arkadyevna with peculiar precision. "Please don't think I'm condemning you. Not at all. Perhaps in her place I should have done the same. I do not and cannot enter into details," she added, looking timidly into his gloomy face. "But you must call things by their real names. You wish me to go and see her and to receive her, and so rehabilitate her in society. But please understand that I cannot do it. I have daughters growing up, and I must move in society for my husband's sake. Suppose I go to see Anna Arkadyevna. She will understand that I cannot ask her to my house, or must do it in such a way that she does not meet those who see things differently. That would offend her. I am not able to raise her. But I don't consider that she has fallen lower than hundreds of people whom you do receive," said Vronsky still more gloomily, and rose in silence, having understood that his sister's-in-law determination was final. "Alexis, don't be angry with me. Please understand that it is not my fault," said Varya, looking at him with a timid smile. "I'm not angry with you," he said just as gloomily, "but I am doubly pained. I am pained too because this breaks our friendship. No, not breaks it, but weakens it. You understand that for me too there can be no other course." With those words he left her. Vronsky understood that it was vain to make any further attempts, and that they would have to spend those few days in Petersburg as in a strange town, avoiding contact with their former world in order not to lay themselves open to unpleasantnesses and insults, which were so painful to her. One of the most disagreeable features of his position in Petersburg was that Karenina seemed to be everywhere, and his name in every mouth. It was impossible to start any conversation without its turning upon Karenina, impossible to go anywhere without meeting him. So at least it seemed to Vronsky, as a man with a sore finger feels that he is continually knocking that finger against everything, as if on purpose. The stay in Petersburg seemed to him still more trying, because he noticed all the time in Anna a new and to him incomprehensible mood. At one moment she appeared to be in love with him, and at the next would turn cold, irritable, and impenetrable. Something tormented her, and she hid it from him, appearing not to notice the insults that were poisoning his life, and which should have been still more painful to her with her acuteness of perception. 29. One of Anna's reasons for returning to Russia was to see her son. From the day she left Italy, the thought of that meeting did not cease to agitate her. The nearer they came to Petersburg, the greater its joy and importance appeared. She did not ask herself how she should contrive it. It seemed to her natural and simple that she should see her son when she was in the same town with him. But on reaching Petersburg, her present social position presented itself clearly to her, and she realized that it would be difficult to arrange the meeting. She had been in Petersburg 2 days. The thought of her son did not leave her for an instant, but she had not yet seen him. She felt she had not the right to go straight to the house where she might encounter Karenina. Possibly they might not even admit her. It was painful to her even to think of writing to and coming into contact with her husband. She could be calm only when she did not think of him. To meet her son when he was out for a walk, after finding out when and where he went, was not enough. She had been preparing herself so for that meeting, had so much to say to him, and so much wanted to embrace and kiss him. Sereja's old nurse might have helped and advised her, but she was no longer in Karenina's household. In this uncertainty, and in searching for the old nurse, 2 days had gone by. Having heard about Karenina's intimate friendship with the Countess Lydia Ivanovna, Anna on the 3rd day resolved to write her a letter, which cost her much effort, and in which she intentionally mentioned that permission to see her son must depend on her husband's magnanimity. She knew that if that letter were shown to him, he, continuing his magnanimous role, would not refuse her request. The commissionaire, who delivered her letter, brought back the most cruel and unexpected reply, that there would be no answer. Never had she felt so humiliated as when, having called in the commissionaire, she heard from him the full account of how he had waited and had then been told that there would be no answer. Anna felt herself humiliated and wounded, but she saw that the Countess Lydia Ivanovna was right from her own point of view. Her grief was the more poignant because she had to bear it alone. She could not share it with Vronsky, and did not wish to. She knew that, though he was the chief cause of her misery, the question of her seeing her son would seem to him quite unimportant. She knew he would never be able to appreciate the depth of her anguish, and that his coldness, if the matter were mentioned, would make her hate him. And she feared that, more than anything else in the world, and therefore hid from him everything concerning her son. Having spent all that day at the hotel, considering how she might see her son, she resolved to write to her husband. She had already composed a letter when she received Lydia Ivanovna's reply. The Countess's silence had made her feel humble, but the letter, and what she read between its lines, so irritated her. Its malevolence seemed so revolting when compared with her passionate and legitimate love for his son, that she became indignant with others and ceased to blame herself. That coldness, that pretense of feeling, she said to herself. They want to wound me and torture the child, and shall I submit to them? Not on any account. She's worse than I. Anyhow, I don't lie. And there and then she resolved that next day, Sereja's birthday, she would go straight to her husband's house, and would bribe the servants or deceive them, but would at any cost see her son, and destroy that monstrous falsehood with which they surrounded the unfortunate child. She drove to a toy shop, purchased a lot of toys, and devised a plan of action. She would go early in the morning, at about 8, when Karenina would certainly not be up. She would have ready in her hand some money to give to the hall porter and the footman, in order that they should let her in. Without raising her veil, she would say she had been sent by Sereja's godfather to wish him many happy returns of the day, and that she was to put the toys by his bedside. The only thing she did not prepare was what she would say to her son. Much as she thought about that, she could not prepare the words. Next morning, Anna went alone, and at 8 o'clock got out of the hired carriage and rang the bell at the front door of the house which used to be her home. "Go and see what it is. It's some lady," said Kapitonich, who was not yet dressed, and in overcoat and goloshes peeped from the window at the veiled lady standing close to the door. His assistant, a lad whom Anna did not know, had hardly opened the door when she entered, and taking a 3-ruble note from her muff, hastily thrust it into his hand. "Sereja, Sergei Alexeyevich," she said, and walked on. After examining the note, the porter's assistant stopped her at the inner glass door. "Whom do you want?" he asked. She did not hear his words and made no reply. Noticing the stranger's confusion, Kapitonich himself came out, admitted her, and inquired what she wanted. "I come from Prince Skorodumov to see Sergei Alexeyevich," said she. "He's not up yet," said the hall porter, carefully scrutinizing her face. Anna had not foreseen at all that the totally unaltered appearance of the hall of the house where she had lived for 9 years would so deeply affect her. One memory after another, both joyful and painful, rose in her mind, and for a moment she forgot why she had come. "Would you like to wait?" said Kapitonich, helping her off with her cloak. Having done so, he glanced again at her face, and, recognizing her, silently bowed low. "Come in, Your Excellency," he said. She wished to speak, but her voice refused to utter a sound. With a look of guilty entreaty at the old man, she went with light steps up the stairs. Bending forward and catching the steps with his goloshes, Kapitonich ran after her, trying to overtake her. "The tutor may be there and not yet dressed. I will announce you." Anna continued to ascend the familiar steps without understanding what the old man was saying. "This way, please. To the left. Please excuse its not being quite clean. He has been moved to the old sitting room now," said the hall porter, panting. "Allow me. Please wait a little, Your Excellency. I'll just look in," he said, having overtaken her. He opened a big door and vanished behind it. Anna paused and waited. "He's only just woken up," said the porter when he came out again. Just as he spoke, Anna heard the sounds of a child yawning. She recognized her son by the sound of the yawn and pictured him vividly before her. "Let me in! Let me in!" she cried, and entered at the big door. To the right of the door stood a bed on which sat the boy, his nightshirt unbuttoned, bending his little body backward, stretching himself and finishing his yawn. At the moment when his lips were closing, they extended into a blissful, sleepy smile, and with that smile he again fell slowly and sweetly backwards. "Sareja," she whispered, drawing nearer with inaudible steps. During the time they had been parted, and under the influence of that gush of love which she had felt for him of late, she had always imagined him as a little fellow of 4, the age when she had loved him best. Now he was not even as she had left him. He was still further removed from the 4-year-old child. He had grown still more, and had got thinner. What did it mean? How thin his face was, how short his hair, how long his arms, how changed since she had left him. But still, it was he. The slope of the head was his, the lips were his, the soft neck and the broad shoulders. "Sareja," she repeated, just above the child's ear. He raised himself again on his elbow, moved his tousled head from side to side, as if seeking for something, and opened his eyes. Silently and questioningly he gazed for a few moments at his mother, who stood motionless before him. Then suddenly, smiling blissfully, he closed his heavy eyelids and fell once more, not backwards, but forwards, into her arms. "Sareja, my dear little boy," she uttered, catching her breath and embracing his plump little body. "Mamma," he muttered, wriggling about in her arms so as to touch them with different parts of his body. Sleepily smiling with closed eyes, he moved his plump hands from the back of his bed to her shoulders, leaning against her and enveloping her in that sweet scent of sleepiness and warmth which only children possess, and began rubbing himself against her neck and shoulder. "I knew," he said, opening his eyes. "Today's my birthday. I knew you would come. I'll get up directly." While saying this, he was again falling asleep. Anna watched him with greedy eyes. She noticed how he had grown and changed during her absence. She recognized, and yet did not quite recognize his bare legs, now so big, which he had freed from the blanket, and his cheeks, now grown thinner, and the short locks of hair at the back of his head, where she had so often kissed him. She touched it all, and could not speak. Tears were choking her. "What are you crying about, Mamma?" he asked, now quite awake. "Mamma, what are you crying about?" he exclaimed in a fretful voice. "I won't cry. I am crying for joy. It is so long since I saw you. I won't, she said, swallowing her tears and turning away. "But it's time for you to get dressed," she said after a pause when she had recovered, and without releasing his hands, she sat down by his bed on a chair on which his clothes were lying ready. "How do you dress without me? How do you—" She tried to speak simply and cheerfully, but could not, and turned away again. "I don't wash with cold water. Papa says I mustn't. You have not seen Vasily Lukich. He will come presently, and you are sitting on my clothes." And Sareja burst out laughing. She looked at him and smiled. "Mamma, dearest, darling," he shouted, again throwing himself upon her and embracing her, as if he only now, having seen her smile, clearly realized what had happened. "You don't want that," he said, taking off her bonnet, and on seeing her without it, he began kissing her again, as though he had only just seen her. "Well, and what did you think about me? You did not think I was dead." "I never believed it." "You didn't believe it, my darling?" I knew, he cried, repeating his favourite phrase, and seizing her hand, which was caressing his hair. He pressed her palm to his mouth, covering it with kisses. 30. Meanwhile, Vasily Lukich, who had not first understood who the lady was, having realized from what he heard that she was the mother who had left her husband, and whom he, having come to the house only after she had left it, had never seen, hesitated whether to go in or not, or whether to go tell Karenina. Having at last concluded that his duty was to get Sareja up at the appointed time, and that therefore he need not consider who was sitting there, the boy's mother or anyone else, but that he must do his duty, he dressed, went up to the door, and opened it. But the caresses of the mother and son, the sound of their voices and what they were saying, made him change his mind. He shook his head, sighed, and closed the door again. "I will wait another 10 minutes," he said to himself, coughing and wiping away his tears. Meanwhile, among the servants there was great commotion. They all knew that the mistress had come, that Kapitonich had admitted her, and that she was now in the nursery. But the master always went to the nursery before 9, and they all understood that a meeting between him and his wife was inconceivable and must be prevented. Corney, the valet, went down into the hall porter's room to inquire who had let her in, and hearing that it was Kapitonich who had done so, he reprimanded the old man. The hall porter remained obstinately silent, but when the valet said he ought to get the sack, Kapitonich rushed at Corney, and, flourishing his hands about before Corney's face, began to speak out. "Yes, I dare say you would not have let her in. I've been in service here 10 years, and have had nothing but kindness. You'd better go up and tell her. You be off, please. You're an artful one, you are. You'd better look after yourself and how to fleece the master of fur coats." "Soldier," said Corney contemptuously, and turned to the nurse who had just entered. "Now judge for yourself, Maria Efimovna," he said to her. "He's let her in without telling anybody, and Alexis Alexandrovitch will be ready in a minute, and will go to the nursery." "Dear, dear, what a business," said the nurse. "You must detain him somehow, Corney Vasilić. The master, I mean. And I'll run and get her out of the way. What a business." When the nurse entered, Sergeja was just telling his mother how he and Nadenka fell down together when ice-hilling, and turned 3 somersaults. She was listening to the sound of his voice, saw his face and the play of his features, felt his hands, but did not understand what he was saying. She must go away, must leave him. That was all she thought and felt. She heard Vasily Lukitch's step as he came to the door and coughed, and then the steps of the nurse as she entered. But she sat as if turned to stone, powerless to speak or rise. "Madam, dear," the nurse began, coming up to Anna and kissing her hands and shoulders. "What joy God has sent our little one on his birthday, and you have not changed at all." "Ah, nurse dear, I did not know you were in the house," said Anna, rousing herself for a moment. "I don't live here. I live with my daughter, and I've only come to wish him many happy returns, Anna Arkadyevna, dear." Suddenly the nurse burst into tears and again began to kiss Anna's hand. Sergeja, with bright eyes and beaming smile, holding his mother with one hand and his nurse with the other, jumped with his plump bare feet onto the carpet. The tenderness of his beloved nurse for his mother sent him into raptures. "Mamma, she often comes to see me, and when she comes—" he began, but stopped, noticing that his nurse was whispering something in his mother's ear, and that a look of fear and of something like shame, that did not at all suit her face, appeared there. She came up to him and said, "My darling." She could not say goodbye, but the expression of her face said it, and he understood. "Darling, darling Kutik," she said, calling him by the pet name she used when he was quite little. "You won't forget me? You—" But she could say no more. How many things she thought of later that she might have said, but now she did not know what to say and could not speak. But Sergeja understood all she wanted to tell him. He understood that she was unhappy and that she loved him. He had even understood what the nurse had said in a whisper. He had caught the words, "always before 9 o'clock," and he understood that they referred to his father, and that his mother and father must not meet. This he had grasped, but he could not make out why that look of fear and shame appeared on her face. She could not have done wrong, and yet seemed afraid and ashamed of something. He wanted to ask a question which would clear up his doubts, but dared not. He saw that she suffered, and he was sorry for her. He pressed against her in silence, and then whispered, "Don't go. He's not coming yet." His mother moved him away from her, to see whether he really believed what he was saying, and in the frightened look on his face, she saw not only that he was speaking about his father, but that he was, as it were, asking her what he ought to think of him. "Sergeja, my darling," she said, "love him. He's better and kinder than I am, and I am to blame toward him. When you are grown up, you will be able to judge." "There is nobody better than you," he cried out in desperation through his tears, and seizing her by her shoulders, he hugged her with all his might, his arms trembling with the effort. "Darling little one," said Anna, and began to cry in the same weak and childlike way as he. At that moment the door opened, and Vasily Lukic entered. Steps were heard approaching the other door, and the nurse said in a frightened whisper, "Coming," and handed Anna her bonnet. Sureja sank down on his bed and began to sob, hiding his face in his hands. Anna moved the hands away, kissed him again on his wet face, and went rapidly out. Karenina was advancing toward her. When he saw her, he stopped and bowed his head. Despite what she had just said, that he was better and kinder than she was, after casting at him a rapid glance, which took in his whole figure to the minutest detail, she was seized by a feeling of loathing and anger toward him, and of jealousy of her son. She swiftly let down her veil, and with quickened steps almost ran out of the room. She had not had time even to unwrap the toys she had chosen with so much love and sadness the day before, and she took them back with her.